Hi everyone, this is Ian for PokerVIP.com. I'm making my first video for the site. It's going to be 2 tables of 50 Zoom live play session. So I will jump into the action. I am using a HUD for this session. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been playing poker for 9 years, professionally since 2014, and I describe my approach as game theory orientated, but with a lot of exploitative adjustments. And I play primarily 6-max cash games online. So I'll try not to talk too much about trivial preflop spots and focus more on situations where I think there's a strategy point to clarify. Pocket fives here though, too weak to play against cut-off open. Ace-5 here against what seems to be quite a tight player. We are probably not going to get 3 streets of value here against a 10 versus this kind of player. He's playing 22-16. So we'll go for a check back on the flop, try and induce some light bets on the turn and river from him. And I do see weaker players betting a 10 quite often on the turn. Therefore, I'm going to value bet my ace on the river. Against a more regular opponent, you would infrequently see second pair bet there on the turn, so I think there's less value to be had. But you should always be looking for thin value against weaker opponents, and specifically against people that have lower check raise percentages. Okay, we got the ace-king here. We're going to obviously squeeze. And with... we have a weaker player in the small blind, but he is folding a lot to 3 bets. But we'll make it 675 here. The initial opener isn't folding much at all at 30%. Ten-6 suited. We're gonna, against a somewhat tight-looking opponent, we're gonna see if we can get in for a limp, which we do. And we're gonna bet the flop here. We definitely have a range advantage. We expect our opponent to frequently 4-bet ace-king pre, and we have all ace-king in our range. So I definitely like a bet on the flop. And we'll continue to bet this turn, which is also very good for us, as it doesn't improve our opponent's range, meaning that our ace-king combos that we have and he doesn't are still the effective nuts in this scenario. Ace-8 suited here. It'd be nice to have some kind of stats on this player, but we don't. But it's definitely going to be a call. Okay, so we'll check back the flop. Just going to see how many tables he's playing. Okay, so he is playing 4 tables. Honestly, this is close, but given how dominant we are over his ace-king combinations, which he has all of, I think I like a call on the turn, but it's very close to a fold. But yeah, I think to 1 bet of half pot, especially after we've seen a check on the flop, I think we can just about get away with a call there. But it's very close, and I could be convinced that a fold is better there. It does depend a lot on the 3-bet range of the opponent, but given that he was an unknown, I decided to make what I think was the more default play, but very, very close there in my opinion. It's important to remember, of course, that I'm betting a lot of my strong hands on the flop. So I don't want my opponent to be able to exploitatively bet everything on the turn, and I need to be able to defend sometimes. I need to try and defend sometimes against aggression. So pocket sevens here. I'm going to make the call with a recreational player in the big blind. Certainly would not call if there was a regular there. The reason for that is just that with a recreational player in the big blind who's often going to be calling and making, we hope, mistakes post-flop, it increases the EV of our call. Whereas versus 2 regulars, we're unlikely to get paid off out of position when we do flop a set. Sufficiently enough to justify the call and the number of times that we'll simply have to check fold. Okay, pocket 8s here will be a easy defend. And an easy check call on the flop. Okay, turn would have been close, I think, if we'd have faced a bet. Our hand seems stronger than it is. But on the river now, it's clearly a value bet. And I think we're quite polarized here in terms of our betting range. So we'll go for quite a large sizing. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Zoom. It's a popular format, obviously allows you to play a lot of hands per hour. Going to start off with a bet here with the 8-9. I'll do a lot of checking here, but this is one of the hands that's going to be in a betting range for me. We need a lot of protection against overcards. And blocking top set is also very nice in a situation where he's probably not cold calling with pocket 4s pre-flop. Pocket deuces going to check raise, and we'll check call with the 8-9. And I think fairly easy lead on the river in a situation where our opponent's unlikely to have an 8 or jack 8. Fairly easy bet with the deuces. Decided not to make it too big. And here, going to bet quite big. I think our opponent can definitely have a set. He can definitely have a set here, and it puts him in a very tough situation. He does elect to make the fold. So we did get paid off with the deuces. You'll notice that on the flop I did raise quite big. I raised to 24 big blinds, which is a lot on the flop, but I had that player marked as a potential recreational player. And what you'll find is, and this is absolutely crucial when you're playing the micro stakes, recreational players, or in general presumed weaker players, tend to have inelastic continuing ranges. And what that means is that the range of our opponent for continuing against a 15 big blind raise and a 24 big blind raise will be almost identical. So when you do have a strong value hand, such as a set, which is absolutely crushing the board, I would strongly urge you to use a larger sizing against a presumed weaker player. In contrast, against a more regular opponent, you need to be trying to play a more balanced strategy. And opting for a smaller sizing allows you to basically expand the amount of hands that you are raising, and a higher frequency check raise in general, which a smaller size allows you to do, is definitely a strong counter strategy to players that are 3-betting often. So you should also bear that in mind when you're playing against regulars. In terms of the 8-9 hand, I do think it's a situation where our opponent might have bet the river, but I find it very hard to believe that he would call a check raise. So I just felt as though betting there was the stronger play. 9-10 here, we 3-bet pre-flop. I'm just going to bet my full range on this flop, small blind versus button. And we do see the fold. Very strong board for us. The queen 4 deuce, small blind versus button. We have all the queens plus. Our opponent does not. And we also have a very high concentration of Broadway cards. A larger proportion of our range will be queen X plus there. And that allows us to take a high frequency betting strategy, which basically puts our opponent's range under a lot of pressure. Okay, so we faced 2 leads here with the queens. And important to note here, blocking 2 queens blocks our opponent's bluffing range. If he was leading king, queen, queen, jack, any of those sort of hands, we obviously block those. So always important to keep blockers in mind when you're making decisions about calling down. Essentially, the theory point is that you want to block hands in your opponent's value betting range and not block hands in your opponent's bluffing range. Queen 9, going to defend here, and we flop an open-ended straight draw. We will check to the razor. I'm going to continue checking here. I think we can sometimes win with our 9, and I don't think we get called by worse hands when we bet on the turn. And on the river, this opponent has very low one when saw flop, very low river bet, very low aggression factor, and he's also calling 1% in the small blind, so I think very easy fold there. Always important to be looking at your opponent's statistics, especially when making decisions about whether or not, or making a decision whether or not to call the river. I tend to find large imbalances in people's game, especially with regards to river raises and river bets in general. You'll find that some opponents are taking very aggressive strategy on the river and some opponents are betting very infrequently, which implies they are betting with a much stronger range. Pocket queens here. We have a hand that is very, very strong unless we start to face raises. But I would say that given people at these stakes tend to underbluff, it plays very well as a bet. Just getting as much value as possible from a jack and any ace of spades that the opponent may have. And then check the river and evaluate. I would expect a large bet implied a very strong range. I wouldn't expect to see a large bet from a jack on the river. So I'd be, somewhat happy in potentially check folding on the river on a blank. Pocket kings here, we're going to raise. And with the 4-5, I'm just going to give up here. I don't want to try and bluff a assumed recreational player off a pair or king high. Pocket kings on a6-4. We should definitely have a range advantage. Our opponent should have a higher concentration of basically non-ace-x hands. So I expect us still to have a range advantage here. But I'm going to go ahead and not opt to bet full range. I'm going to check the flop here. Kings doesn't need any protection. And given that I don't expect players at this stake level to be exploiting a slightly weakened checking range, I definitely don't mind taking a slightly more passive line with kings rather than and splitting my range rather than playing a bet full range strategy on the flop. And we'll go for a small block bet here with kings. Ace king, I'm just going to check. This player is 3-betting very aggressively, so we'll go ahead and 4-bet. Moving back to the king's hand, we're basically trying to get value out of smaller pairs than our own there, which we did. We got some value off queens, but it's possible we could have got a slightly larger bet in there with kings. Queen high board here. We do have the king of spades. Our opponent can definitely have a lot of queen x. And he can also have ace king himself as well as jacks and tens. So I'm going to put a bet out there and then I'm probably going to go all in on any spade. Our opponent's check raise is very low. So I'm kind of using that to my advantage here in that I can basically be not too concerned about getting check raised bluff by a hand like ace king. Given how low his check raise percentage is, I think it's unlikely he's doing that. So it allows me to take a more aggressive line on the flop. And on the turn, I think we just want to shove here with like any jack, any flush draw. I think if we start shoving all ace king as well, it's just like too wide. So I think we can just check back here and basically give up if we face a bet. And I think we're just giving up here. Yeah. We would shove kings plus on the turn. Pocket ace is going to increase my raise size with a weaker player in the big blind. So yeah, just quickly moving back to the ace-king hand. If we start going all in on the turn there with a hand as weak as ace-king, I think we're going to be over-bluffing that spot. Especially given the fact that our opponent, as we saw, he did actually have that hand, but our opponent can very often have ace-queen, and we do not have that in our 4-betting range. So the queen-high board is relatively stronger for the out-of-position player than many other boards would be. That being said, with all the kings and aces in our range and pocket queens, we should still have a range advantage, but it's just a board where our opponent does have some strong hands he can defend with. And ace-3 here, we're going to make a 3-bet. Ace-3 suited, sorry. Our opponent's folding a lot to 3-bets, so hopefully get this one through quite often. And you should really look for these people who are, you know, folding over 55% to 3-bets and really look to punish them. That being said, against these players, one of the big ways you make profit is from that pre-flop exploitation. But you should be very aware that when they do continue, their range has strengthened significantly, and you should play accordingly post-flop. Essentially what I'm saying is don't get too greedy, identify opponents' weaknesses, and don't try to win every pot. So ace-9 here, very good board for the cutoff versus the big blind. We'll go ahead and take the high frequency c-bet option. Definitely going to be a good strategy against a player of this type who is check raising infrequently and folding a lot to continuation bets. And this really falls into that criteria that I identified, which is, you know, an opponent that's folding a lot pre-flop, folding a lot on the flop. So when we get to, by the time we get to the turn, this player's range is going to be very strong, and we essentially should not be taking a high frequency bluffing strategy against this type of player. King 7, we took a stab on the ace-high board and opted for the check fold on the turn with no equity. Pocket queens here, we're going to raise up against a under-the-gun limper. So he's limping infrequently. This player's limping infrequently, so I think his range can be quite strong here. I'm actually going to check the turn. And with the aces, we're going to check the turn as well. I would be checking this flop often against an in-position caller, but against an assumed weaker opponent, I decided to go for the bet. And we will check call the turn. And with the queens, I'm going to go for a small bet on the river. Try and get called by an ace-jack, ace-10, queen-jack, queen-10 type hand. And we're going to... And we do get called by a queen-jack. And with the aces, I think this is quite a clear fold here against a player with basically quite tight stats. The board's got very scary for our hand, so not concerned at all about throwing our hand away there. And, you know, this is another situation where when our opponent checks back the turn, he's definitely quite capped, and we definitely aren't that capped from a theory perspective. So, you know, the small bet size on the river could definitely be perceived by a competent player as being quite capped, because why would we bet small into a capped range with a strong hand? From a theory perspective, that doesn't make sense. And so a competent player could exploit us here and raise very aggressively versus this bet size. But this brings me on to another key strategy point, which is you don't need to be concerned about being exploited by players that aren't observant. So I'm going to wrap up the video now. I'm going to sit out next big blind. We'll just go for a steal with the king 7 and a call with the pocket 7s. And on the queen 10 board, we will go ahead and check, and it's going to be a check fold with the pocket 7s. And a check fold with the 6s too. King Jack here. Okay. 11% 3-bet, small blind versus button. I'm going to go ahead and 4-bet this hand. Okay, and this player does have a much higher check raise, so not as eager to bet a medium strength hand on the flop. And we face another check on the turn. I think we can go for a bet now. Pocket 5s, we check it down to the river. Bottom of range here, definitely don't mind just folding. And we'll see what our opponent does here. He does have a reasonably high check fold percentage at 57. So I definitely am expecting his range to be slightly weaker when he checks twice. This is a strange play here. I feel like our hand is strong enough to value bet, to value shove, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And we do see a snap fold from our opponent. Yeah, I think Jack or better there is definitely strong enough to value shove. Jack 9, we're going to fold in the cutoff. So we're just playing through the last few hands here. Pocket 6s. We are deep, so we'll go ahead and call. Take a flop. We have good implied odds with the deep stacks. And our opponent's bet about 40% of the pot here. He's definitely 3-betting aggressively. I think we can just about call here. We're going to be folding a lot of sort of ace-queen, ace-jack of diamond type hands on the flop. So we'll continue to check here and hopefully win against a hand like ace-king or ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited. Okay, so we do lose against a 10. I felt like our opponent wouldn't have too many 9x in his range there, so I think had the board been a 10 jack deuce, it would be much more of a fold on the flop, but I think with his overcard heavy range, we can just make the call once there. Okay, so that's us sat up both tables. So this was my first video for PokerVIP.com. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I was able to give you a good insight into my game and how I approach poker. I am doing a bankroll challenge over on Twitch, so if you want to come and hang out and follow along, it is Iain Salter Poker. There's more information about that on my PokerVIP bio, as well as information about my micro stakes and small stakes coaching offerings. So good luck, and I hope to see you at the tables.